It started with a bright orange envelope. Not a thank you note. Not a newsletter. But a $500 HOA fine for the crime of parking 3 cars in his own driveway. Jack Miller wasn't looking for a fight. But when his daughter was photographed like a criminal, his wife was insulted, and the HOA president, Karen Mitchell, told him families like yours don't belong here. Something snapped. What Karen didn't know. Jack had spent the past 5 years quietly buying up 67% of the neighborhood, one house at a time, through a web of LLCs and ironclad paperwork. While Karen measured lawns and wrote petty citations, Jack was building an empire in silence. Now, she was about to find out who really ran the community. This isn't just a story about parking rules. It's a high-stakes neighborhood rebellion. A secret plan. A courtroom showdown. And one man's mission to take down a tyrant the only way that matters, by rebuilding something better in her place. If you love real-life drama, plot twists, and revenge that tastes like justice, you're going to love this. Subscribe now to Real HOA Drama and buckle up, because in this neighborhood, the quiet ones hit the hardest. The envelope was orange. Not pale orange. Not peachy. No, it was that aggressive, fluorescent, traffic cone kind of orange that screams bad news before you even rip it open. Jack Miller stood at his front door, holding the envelope like it was radioactive. His dog barked in the distance. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a leaf blower whined. But all Jack could hear was the sound of his blood boiling as he unfolded the paper and read the words that would change everything. Immediate HOA fee increase. $500 per month. Violation. Excessive vehicles on property. He blinked, read it again, and actually laughed. A bitter, disbelieving kind of laugh that bubbled up from deep in his chest. 3 cars. That's what this was about. His battered work truck, used daily for his construction jobs. Emma's SUV, for her 12-hour hospital shifts. And Lily's used Honda Civic, a sweet 16 gift with more rust than horsepower. All parked in his own driveway. His property. But that didn't stop Karen Mitchell, self-declared queen of the HOA, from slapping him with a fine that could feed a family of 4 for a month. Jack didn't need to look out the window to know she was out there. He heard the familiar click of her heels on the sidewalk, the flutter of her clipboard, and the sharp snap of her phone camera shutter. She was doing her morning inspection walk, or as Jack liked to call it, her daily safari. And today her prey was apparently cars. Jack, she's out there again. Emma called from the living room, not even needing to say who she was. Jack walked to the window, coffee in hand, and stared out at Karen as she knelt, at the edge of their driveway with a tape measure. You know what? He said, setting his mug down. We're not parking Lily's car in the garage. We're not hiding anything. This is our home, not a crime scene. Emma hesitated. But the garage is full of your gear and my supplies. We don't even have space. Exactly, Jack cut in. And we explained that. At the last meeting. Remember? When she smirked and said, maybe this neighborhood isn't for you. His jaw clenched. His hands tightened into fists. Because he remembered another meeting. One that happened 20 years ago in a different neighborhood with a different HOA president, but the same kind of smug smile. That was the day his dad lost their family home. Jack had been just a teenager then, watching his father get bullied into selling their house at a loss after months of unjust fines and nitpicky violations. Lawn 2 inches too tall. Garden hose in the wrong position. It had destroyed his dad. But it had shaped Jack. He'd sworn he would never let that happen to his own family. That's when he started reading about real estate. About ownership. About LLCs and land trusts. While Karen spent her days stocking mailboxes and measuring mailbox heights, Jack had spent the last 5 years quietly buying up every property that hit the market in their neighborhood, using different company names, hiding his stake in plain sight. This fee? This $500 insult? It wasn't just a slap in the face. It was the final straw. The one that told Jack it was time to stop watching and start moving. Karen thought she was powerful because she had a clipboard and a title. But Jack had something better. He had a plan. And now it was personal. The text came through at exactly 10:04 a.m. Closing complete. You now own 67% of the neighborhood. Congratulations, Mr. Miller. Jack stared at the message for a moment, then locked his phone and tucked it back into his pocket like it held state secrets. And in a way, it did. That one sentence marked the end of 5 years of quiet maneuvering and the beginning of something much bigger. It had all started with a foreclosure down the street, the Patterson place. Then came the Wilsons' house after they downsized. One by one, every for-sale sign in the neighborhood had become an opportunity. Jack had never shown his face at any of the closings. Instead, he operated through a web of LLCs with names bland enough to make a spreadsheet yawn. Elmwood Investments, Crescent Ridge Holdings, Blue Lantern Properties. Each one legally distinct, each one quietly buying up another piece of the puzzle. And now, he didn't just live here. He owned it. Sunrise Realty, his umbrella corporation, now held deeds to 2/3 of the homes in the neighborhood. Enough to make him the majority stakeholder in the HOA. Enough to change the rules. Enough to bring the clipboard queen herself, Karen Mitchell, to her knees. Jack leaned back in his chair, staring at the property map stretched across his desk. Each house he owned was marked with a tiny green. The pattern looked like a battlefield, and Jack had slowly, meticulously conquered it house by house without firing a single shot. Checkmate, he whispered to himself, allowing a rare smile to creep onto his face. The man wasn't a fan of drama. He'd kept his head down for years, nodding politely at Karen's forced smiles and pretending not to notice when she glared at his truck or scribbled in her little pink notebook. But the time for politeness had passed. Now it was time to step into the light and shine it directly on everything Karen had been doing in the shadows. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder labeled HOA evidence. Inside were photos, meeting transcripts, and a spreadsheet that would have made an auditor weep. Karen's selective enforcement, outrageous fines, misappropriated funds, it was all there. Every biased penalty, every friend she let slide, every inch of grass she measured while her own yard looked like a haunted jungle. It wasn't just micromanagement. It was control. It was abuse of power. And now, he had the power to end it. The next HOA meeting was set for Tuesday evening. Karen had no idea what was coming. She'd probably be preparing another slideshow of Jack's driveway from 12 angles, maybe even some satellite footage if she could figure out Google Earth. But Jack was preparing something else entirely. He was preparing to pull back the curtain. He could already imagine the look on Karen's face when he'd stand up, calm and measured, and reveal exactly who had been sitting silently in her meetings all these years. Not just a violator, not just a neighbor she didn't like, but the majority owner of the entire development. The man she thought she could bully out of the neighborhood was about to become her boss. Jack didn't want revenge for revenge's sake, but he wanted justice. And he wanted his daughter to grow up in a neighborhood where people were treated fairly, not ruled by fear and tape measures. He reached for his coffee, took a long sip, and opened a new file on his computer. Title: HOA Meeting Strategy, Operation Sunrise. Step 1, show up. Step 2, show proof. Step 3, show them who really runs this place. The board had no idea what was about to hit them. And Karen? Well, she was about to find out that the man she thought was just another rule breaker was actually the man who held all the rules in his hands. Tuesday evening arrived cloaked in the kind of stillness that usually comes before a storm, or in this case, before a Karen-fueled HOA meeting. Jack walked into the community center's meeting room with the steady calm of a man who already knew the ending of the movie. The air was thick with tension and the faint scent of folding chair vinyl. Every seat was filled. Neighbors whispered in tight clusters, eyes darting between the projector screen and the sparkling podium at the front. And there she stood, Karen Mitchell, dressed like a home goods CEO, clutching her signature glittery pink gavel like it was the sword of justice. She tapped it on the podium once. "Let's begin," she chirped with that tight-lipped smile that looked like it had been Botoxed into place during a clearance special. The lights dimmed. The projector clicked. And then the PowerPoint presentation from hell began. Slide 1. A wide-angle photo of Jack's driveway, taken from an unnecessarily dramatic low angle that made 3 ordinary cars look like a smuggler's convoy. The caption in bold read, "Vehicle violations, Thompson Street traffic nightmare." Jack blinked. Was that Comic Sans? As you can see, Karen began, clicking to the next slide, Mr. Miller's property has become what I can only describe as a used car lot. Jack raised an eyebrow. 3 cars. All legally registered. All parked in his own driveway. But Karen had gone full Hollywood on this one. Zoomed-in shots, different angles, a weather report claiming his vehicles contributed to potential snowdrift obstructions. Next slide, a grainy photo of Lily's Honda Civic. The words, "Unmoved for 48+ hours. Possible abandonment." Jack sat straighter in his seat. That car? Lily had just come home from college for the weekend. She was inside baking cookies. And now some woman in a sequin blouse was publicly accusing his daughter's car of criminal loitering? Karen continued, flipping through slides like she was pitching a Netflix true crime doc. This level of vehicular congestion violates our community's sense of order. And so, I'm proposing a new rule, she said, lifting a manicured finger. Effective immediately, all homes shall be limited to 2 vehicles, which must be parked in garages only. No exceptions. The room stirred. People glanced at each other. A few gasped. Most frowned. Mr. Patel in the back muttered, "I've got 4 kids and 2 jobs. What garage is she talking about?" Jack's jaw tightened. But it wasn't the rule that finally pushed him over the edge. It was what came next. Karen, with the poise of someone who'd clearly watched too many courtroom dramas, unveiled the piece de resistance, a slideshow of candid photos she'd taken over the weekend. And there it was, a clear picture of Lily stepping out of her Civic in pajama pants, clutching a bag of groceries, and smiling at the family dog. Karen pointed at the screen like she was revealing a crime scene. This vehicle has been parked here continuously for 72 hours. No garage storage. No HOA approval. No movement. Lily, sitting next to Jack, shrank in her seat. Her smile had vanished. That was it. Jack stood up slowly, placing his hand gently on Lily's shoulder before walking to the back of the room. His blood boiled not with rage, but with resolve. He'd planned to wait until the vote. He'd planned to let her talk. But not anymore. Karen had crossed the line. She hadn't just fined him. She hadn't just lied. She'd humiliated his daughter, treated her like a criminal in front of the entire neighborhood for doing nothing more than coming home. Jack pulled out his folder, lips pressed into a tight line. If Karen thought her little slideshow was a bombshell, she was about to find out what a real explosion looked like. Karen was mid-sentence, passionately detailing how his daughter's Honda Civic posed a long-term visual disruption to neighborhood harmony, when Jack Miller stood up. Not fast. Not angry. Just steady.
Calm.
Controlled. The kind of calm that makes people nervous. "Point of order, Madam President," Jack said, his voice clear and steady. Karen's eyes narrowed. "You're not recognized, Mr. Miller." Jack smiled, the kind of smile that said, "I've been waiting for this." Actually, according to HOA Bylaw Section 7.3, any property owner may raise a point of order related to voting procedures. The room fell silent. All the whispering, eye-rolling, and quiet side conversations among neighbors stopped cold. Karen's gavel hand twitched. She hesitated, then stepped back with a forced laugh.
"Fine.
"You have 1 minute. That's all I'll need," Jack said, pulling a thick folder from under his chair and walking to the front of the room. He laid it gently on the table beside Karen's designer gavel, then opened it slowly, theatrically, like revealing a secret menu no one else had known existed. "Over the past 5 years," he began, "a company called Sunrise Realty has been purchasing homes in this neighborhood. Quietly, legally, strategically. Tonight, I'd like to introduce you to their CEO." He paused, then raised his hand. "Hi, that's me." A wave of gasps rippled across the room like a thunderclap in a canyon. Karen blinked.
Once. Twice.
Her face drained of color so fast, Jack wondered if she might faint on the HOA-branded podium. "I now own 67% of the homes in this community," Jack continued, sliding forward a color-coded property map that made Karen's slides look like finger paintings. That makes me the majority stakeholder of this HOA. He clicked a remote. A new image filled the screen. Karen in her pajamas, crouched in Jack's yard at 3:08 a.m., measuring his grass with a ruler. The room exploded. Laughter.
Shouts.
"I knew it," from Mrs. Rodriguez in the back. Even Mr. Jenkins, who never spoke at meetings, let out a "what the hell." Jack clicked again, this time a spreadsheet listing HOA fines by resident. Some neighbors had been fined for invisible weeds, while Karen's friends had gotten away with neon lawn flamingos, unregistered dogs, and one guy who ran a drone repair business out of his garage. Karen stammered, This is all taken out of context." "Oh, I've got context," Jack said. "Here's a recording of Karen telling Mrs. Chen her mailbox was too whimsical for the aesthetic." He pressed play. Karen's voice filled the room, nasal and sharp. "This isn't Disneyland, Angela." Mrs. Chen stood up in her chair. "You fined me $150 for a butterfly decal." Now the neighbors were rising, one after another. Karen made my grandson take down his basketball hoop. She said my garden gnomes were threatening. I got fined for parking my truck 1 inch over my own driveway. The dam had broken. Years of silence, shame, and whispered complaints were suddenly flooding the room. Jack held up one final page. "And here's a document signed by a majority of homeowners requesting a full audit of HOA funds and a vote to dissolve the current board." Karen tried to speak, but her voice cracked under the weight of the moment. Her once regal composure had shattered. This wasn't just a presentation. This was a reckoning. Jack turned to the room, meeting the eyes of the neighbors who'd been bullied, silenced, fined, and ignored. "Tonight," he said, "we stop living under fear. And we start living like neighbors again." Applause erupted, not polite, not forced, but fierce, cathartic, and long overdue. Karen didn't know it yet, but her reign was over. The clipboard crown had just been ripped off her head, and Jack had just stepped into the light. If Karen had been rattled during the HOA meeting, she masked it well, for about 48 hours. Then came the envelope. No return address. No signature. Just a single sheet of paper, typed in all caps. "Your daughter doesn't belong here. Families like yours don't fit this neighborhood." Jack found it in their mailbox on a rainy Thursday morning, tucked between a coupon flyer and a local dentist's newsletter. He read it once, then again, each word pounding louder in his skull. His daughter. Lily. He took a breath, crumpled the paper in his hand, and walked straight into the house. Emma was in the kitchen. She didn't have to ask, she saw it in his face. "Is it her?" she asked softly. Jack didn't answer. He just walked to his home office, opened the security system panel, and pulled up the footage from the previous night. It didn't take long. There, on the screen, at 12:42 a.m., Karen Mitchell, cloaked in a windbreaker and ball cap, sneaking around the edge of the Miller property like some poorly trained cat burglar. She crouched near the Honda Civic, snapped a few photos, then tiptoed toward the mailbox, looking left and right like a cartoon villain. A moment later, she disappeared into the darkness. Jack stared at the screen. His jaw tightened. If she wanted a war, she was about to get one, and this time on his battlefield. He picked up the phone and called Mike Reynolds, his longtime friend and corporate attorney. "You were right," Jack said. "She's not just unhinged. She's dangerous." That afternoon, Jack met Mike downtown, bringing the footage and the letter. Mike didn't even blink. "I've seen this before," he said, flipping through the HOA bylaws like a chef reading a recipe. Power-drunk HOA presidents think they're above the law until someone reminds them what law actually looks like. They looped in Mr. Lopez, a former county investigator turned private contractor, the kind of man who could pull hidden truths out of locked filing cabinets and people's lies. Within days, Lopez found the cracks beneath Karen's polished HOA empire. It started with a case file from 2 years ago. A resident named Nora Green had filed a formal complaint about unfair fines, citing selective enforcement and financial misconduct. The complaint had vanished. Except it hadn't. Lopez traced digital breadcrumbs in the HOA system, discovering metadata logs that showed the document had been manually removed by an admin account linked to, yep, Karen Mitchell. But it didn't stop there. He uncovered 3 more complaints, buried under vague labels like resolved, insufficient grounds, and withdrawn, no action required. All filed by minority homeowners. All documented with detailed evidence. All erased, edited, or ignored. She didn't just abuse her power, Lopez said one evening in Jack's living room, pointing at his laptop screen. She covered it up, systematically, and illegally. Jack leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the pieces coming together. Karen hadn't just wanted to run the HOA. She wanted to shape the neighborhood into her personal version of perfection. One rule at a time. One undesirable family at a time. And now, she was threatening his daughter. His family. It wasn't about fees anymore. It was about who belonged and who she believed didn't. Jack looked across the table at Mike and Lopez. "Let's bring it all," he said. "The photos. The edits. The erase complaints. Every damn receipt. If she wants to play legal chess, then she better be ready to lose her queen." Because the game had changed. And Jack wasn't playing defense anymore. Karen Mitchell didn't back down. She didn't retreat. No, Karen did what Karens do best, she doubled down. Hard. Just 4 days after the HOA meeting where Jack exposed her midnight surveillance and grass-measuring antics, he was served a thick manila envelope, this time by an actual process server. Inside, a formal lawsuit. The defendant, Jack Miller, has engaged in hostile acquisition tactics to unlawfully assume control of the homeowners association. Jack snorted, flipping through the papers in his driveway as his dog barked at the retreating server. "Hostile acquisition?" he muttered. "I bought houses. Not a Fortune 500 company." The suit demanded an emergency injunction to freeze his voting rights, accusing him of conspiring to dismantle the integrity of the HOA, and, this was the kicker, transform the neighborhood into a commercial vehicle depot. Within hours, the rumors began. She said he's going to turn the cul-de-sac into a parking lot for his construction company. "I heard they're rezoning for a warehouse. Did you see that flatbed truck he drives? What if he builds a factory behind the community pool?" Jack couldn't help but marvel at the creativity of suburban gossip, how fear could grow faster than crabgrass. But this wasn't just whispers at the mailbox anymore. Karen had gone full propaganda mode, fanning the flames of doubt with flyers, social media posts, and even a 3-minute voice note blasted across the HOA's group chat. "Some of you may not realize what's happening. Jack Miller isn't your neighbor anymore, he's a developer in disguise." The part that stung most? Some neighbors started to believe her. Jack watched from his porch as the Jenkins couple crossed the street to avoid saying hello. The Rodales, who once shared Christmas cookies, now left HOA meetings early, without a word. And that's when Emma stepped in. "I'm done watching her scare this neighborhood into submission," she said, tying her hair back like a woman heading into battle. "Come on, Lily. We're going door to door." Armed with muffins and printed copies of the actual bylaws, Emma and Lily visited every house on the block. They listened. They explained. They reassured. And they reminded their neighbors of who Jack really was, the guy who shoveled driveways in the winter, helped Mrs. Rodriguez fix her porch last spring, and yes, owned a lot of property, but never abused a single inch of it. Meanwhile, Jack focused on the legal front. Mike Reynolds, his lawyer, was already preparing their case when a new message arrived. Anonymous, no subject line, one PDF attachment. Jack opened it on his laptop. His eyes narrowed. Subject: HOA internal, do not share. From Karen Mitchell. To board members at all. If we push hard enough, Miller's family will move. I've got enough concerned resident letters to launch the emergency vote. Nobody wants construction trash in our driveways. I'll scare him out just like we did with the Tuckers. Remember them? Jack scrolled down, heart pounding. Also, delete the green complaint from archive. Use the old timestamp trick. Keep it clean. He leaned back slowly, a bitter smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. This wasn't just pettiness. This was a cover-up, obstruction, coordinated harassment. And now, Thanks to a whistleblower inside her own camp, he had it in writing. He turned to Mike. "This is it. She's done." Mike nodded, already forwarding the email to their legal file. "This isn't a court case anymore," he said. "This is going to be a reckoning." Jack looked out the window, where Emma and Lily were waving to a neighbor who just shook their hand. The tide was turning. Karen had launched her counterstrike, yes. But Jack had just been handed her blueprint for destruction, and now, all he had to do was let the truth speak louder than the fear. The trial was coming, and Karen didn't even realize she'd just armed the enemy with a smoking gun. By the time Jack arrived at the courthouse, 3 news vans were already parked out front, antennae up, microphones ready, and reporters rehearsing dramatic one-liners about a neighborhood civil war. Karen had clearly made the most of her media contacts, spinning the case as a noble defense of suburban standards against a rogue developer with a vendetta. She even posed for cameras on the courthouse steps, decked out in a pastel suit, oversized sunglasses, and a string of pearls that looked fake but worked hard to scream class. Her attorney, a slick-looking man with too much gel and too little conscience, stood beside her like a budget TV prosecutor. Meanwhile, Jack? He walked in quietly, documents in hand, flanked by his lawyer Mike and a manila folder so thick it needed its own seatbelt. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Neighbors packed the benches. Some had come out of curiosity. Others were hoping for closure. But all of them wanted the same thing, truth. The judge entered. The room stood. And the trial began. Karen's lawyer went first, painting Jack as a manipulative real estate baron who had covertly seized control of the HOA to dismantle the foundation of their community. He even threw in the words, "nefarious agenda" for dramatic flair. Karen nodded solemnly, dabbing the corner of her eye with a tissue like she was auditioning for daytime TV. Then it was Jack's turn. Mike stood calmly and began by playing security footage of Karen circling Jack's house at midnight, snapping photos of his daughter's car like she was a neighborhood vigilante on patrol. The jury leaned forward. Next came the PowerPoint slideshow, but not the kind Karen would have approved. Slide after slide showed Karen's own home blatantly violating HOA rules, her overgrown backyard, her illegal mailbox design, her 4 vehicles spilling into the street like a suburban car show. Then came the finances. Jack clicked to a spreadsheet titled HOA Expense Breakdown, the Karen Years. He highlighted line items showing thousands spent on mysterious landscaping consultations, all paid to her cousin's unregistered business. Mike stepped forward again. "We also have documentation that HOA funds were used to renovate her private backyard deck, despite repeated community maintenance delays. And here's the kicker." He pulled up a screenshot of Karen's Facebook post, poolside in Maui, tropical drink in hand, captioned, "Big thanks to my rule-breaking neighbors for making this vacation possible. Keep those violations coming, HOA perks."
The courtroom gasped.
One juror literally mouthed, "No way." And then, just when things couldn't get worse for Karen, 3 former board members entered the witness box, one after another. Calm, composed, and clearly fed up. First up, Barbara Simmons, the treasurer who resigned in frustration. "She made us pass fines on people she didn't like. We were told to find something, a trash can out of place, a weed in the flower bed, anything." Then came Daryl Boone, a soft-spoken retiree. "She said if we didn't vote with her, we'd be the next targets. She fined my wife $100 for hanging laundry." Finally, James Lee, who had previously stayed silent. "She bragged about using the HOA to filter out people who didn't belong. When I objected, she told me I could either play along or get out of the neighborhood." Karen's face went from defiant to ghost white. Her lawyers started sweating. The judge glanced down at the bench with a raised brow. The courtroom was no longer on the fence. It was clear. This wasn't about cars. This wasn't about lawns or garages or property values. This was about power abused, and a community finally brave enough to face it. When the judge finally recessed for the day, Karen refused to meet Jack's eyes. She stormed past the reporters without a word. But Jack? He simply walked out, shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks, as neighbors followed behind him, no longer whispering, but clapping him on the back, shaking his hand, nodding with respect. The trial wasn't over yet, but the neighborhood had already made up its mind. It wasn't just another day in court. It was the day everything cracked open. The courtroom buzzed with a low, anxious energy. The kind you feel when a storm's about to break, but no one knows where the lightning will strike. Jack sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, calm on the outside, but watching Karen like a hawk. Because today, he knew. Today was the day her mask would finally fall. The prosecution had one last card to play, and Mike, cool as a poker dealer on payday, was ready to deal it. "Your Honor," he said, rising smoothly, "with the court's permission, we'd like to submit an audio recording into evidence, time-stamped, verified, and taken from an internal HOA meeting just 3 months ago." Karen shifted in her seat. Her lawyer frowned. The judge gave a curt nod. "Proceed." Mike tapped a button on the laptop. The courtroom speakers crackled, and then came Karen's voice, sharp and unmistakable. "Of course I make up violations. How else do you think we keep control of who lives here?" Gasps echoed like gunshots. But the audio wasn't finished. "Honestly, I don't care if the rules make sense. I tweak them, so I can get rid of the ones who don't belong. People like Jack, I'll bury him in citations until he sells or breaks." Karen shot to her feet. "That's out of context," she shrieked. It was a joke, just a joke. But her face had gone red, not the embarrassed kind, but the kind of rage that bubbles up when the truth is dragged into daylight. She turned and pointed directly at Jack. "You," she hissed. "You don't belong here. People like you ruin neighborhoods. Blue-collar trash, pretending to be one of us. This place used to be decent before you brought in your trucks and your daughter's junky car." The room fell deathly silent. Even her lawyer flinched. The judge's gavel came down like thunder. "Enough," he snapped. Karen's mouth hung open, suddenly realizing she hadn't just lost her cool, she'd annihilated her case. The judge leaned forward, eyes cold and clear. "In all my years on the bench," he said, "I've seen power abused, rules bent, and neighbors turned against each other. But this is a textbook case of targeted harassment, manipulation of governance, and financial impropriety." He picked up the case file, thick with documents, emails, photos, and now a confession. "I hereby order the immediate removal of Karen Mitchell from the HOA board, a mandatory audit of all HOA financial activity from the past 5 years, and restitution to affected residents in the amount of $147,892.38. Karen slumped back into her seat, like someone had cut her strings. Her pearls tilted sideways. Someone in the audience whispered, "Finally." Jack felt the breath he hadn't realized he was holding slowly leave his lungs. He didn't smile. Not yet. This wasn't a moment for victory laps. This was the moment the wall came down. Not just the wall Karen had built between neighbors with her rules and fines, but the emotional wall that had made good people afraid to speak, afraid to push back, afraid to say, "This is our home too." Outside the courthouse, the media was waiting again. But this time, the microphones pointed at Jack. "How does it feel?" one reporter asked. "To finally take her down?" Jack looked over at Emma, standing proudly beside him. Then at Lily, waving gently to a few neighbors in the crowd. He gave a small smile and said, "This was never about taking someone down. It was about lifting a community back up." And with that, the doors of the courthouse opened, not just literally but symbolically. Because from that moment on, the neighborhood belonged to the people again. 1 week after the courtroom gavel came down on Karen's HOA reign, the community center filled again, but this time, there were no whispered fears, no clipboard-wielding tyrants, no pink gavels smacking down like a judge in a soap opera. This time, the energy was hopeful. Jack stood at the front of the room, dressed in a flannel shirt and jeans, no tie, no speech, no theatrics. Just a neighbor among neighbors. He cleared his throat and looked out at the familiar faces, some skeptical, some tired, some still stunned from the whirlwind of the last month, but all of them present. "This isn't about me," he said simply. "This is about us. We get to decide who we are now and who we want to be." He slid a piece of paper onto the podium, a draft proposal titled HOA Reform Charter. It was plain, clear, and refreshingly free of legalese. Term limits for board members. Full financial transparency. A ban on anonymous fines. Rules made by vote, not by vendetta. And then came the vote for the new board. The nominations rolled in with surprising speed and overwhelming support. Angela Chin, the high school science teacher once fined for having a whimsical mailbox, now unanimously voted in as treasurer. Mrs. Rodriguez, 78 years old, once humiliated for cooking her family's traditional tamales and disrupting the aroma harmony of the cul-de-sac, now appointed chair of community engagement. She brought empanadas to the meeting and got the loudest applause of the night. And Mr. Patel, the retired engineer with a green thumb, formerly ordered to remove his beloved climbing jasmine because Karen claimed it looked too jungle-like, elected as grounds director. His first proposal? Let people grow things that make them smile. The new rules were simple. Park as many cars as you want, as long as they're not blocking anyone. Kids can play basketball in their driveways without fear of fines. You want to grow vegetables? Knock yourself out. Holiday lights can stay up until Easter if your heart so desires. It was the kind of freedom that felt radical simply because it had been denied for so long. And just when people thought they'd seen it all, poetic justice arrived on four wheels.
Karen.
Her car, packed with boxes and trailing a cheap moving truck, rolled into the neighborhood one last time to pick up a few forgotten items. She parked in the exact same spot she used to find people for, 2 inches past the curb. 10 minutes later, someone from the new HOA approached her windshield, peeled off a bright yellow envelope, and neatly stuck it under her wiper. Parking violation. Welcome to a fairer neighborhood. Jack didn't need to see it to know. He heard the chuckles before he saw the photo of it pop up on the neighborhood Facebook group. The caption read, "Poetic justice is alive and well in Thompson Hills." As the sun set that evening, Jack sat on his porch beside Emma and Lily. Kids played tag on the sidewalk. Mr. Patel was already sketching plans for a community garden. Mrs. Rodriguez handed out popsicles like it was July 4th. For the first time in years, the neighborhood actually felt like a neighborhood. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs.
No rulers.
Just neighbors. And as Jack looked out over the quiet street, lit with string lights and laughter, he smiled. Not because he'd won, but because they had. The email came with a subject line Jack never expected to see in his inbox. At first, he thought it was spam. Or maybe some ironic prank. But it wasn't. It was from a well-known documentary producer who had caught wind of the court case, the community overhaul, and yes, the viral photo of Karen's parking ticket. "We think what you've done is extraordinary," the message read. "We want to tell the story of how one man helped an entire neighborhood take its power back." Jack chuckled when he read that line. He wasn't a hero. He hadn't set out to lead a movement. He just wanted to park his daughter's car without being treated like a criminal. But somehow that simple stand had turned into a domino effect, and people were watching. Later that week, Jack got a call from a number he didn't recognize. A man from a town 2 states over introduced himself, voice nervous, hopeful. "Our HOA president's gone power crazy," the man said. "Started finding us for things like lawn shade variance. I heard about your case. Do you think you could help us figure out how to fight back?" Jack didn't hesitate. "Start with your bylaws," he said, sipping coffee. "And whatever you do, record everything." Word traveled fast. Over the next few weeks, Jack's inbox filled with messages from homeowners groups, local officials, and people who just wanted to hear the story. Somehow, Thompson Hills had become a symbol of what could happen when regular people stood up against petty tyranny with brains instead of bricks. But Jack never let the attention change him. He still wore the same boots to the community meetings. Still fixed squeaky fences for neighbors who couldn't. Still grilled burgers every Sunday in his driveway, now joined by 3, sometimes 4 other families, their cars parked wherever they pleased. And then came the sign, erected at the entrance of the neighborhood, carved in clean cedar, with dark bronze letters that gleamed in the morning light. "Welcome to Miller Park, where good neighbors make great neighborhoods. It wasn't just a name. It was a statement, a promise, a reminder of everything they'd built after everything they'd endured. That night, Jack stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a warm mug, the scent of fresh coffee in the air. Outside, the world was quiet.
Calm.
He looked out the window. Emma's SUV was parked right where it always had been. And beside it, Lily's Honda, a little dusty, a little dented, but shining in the porch light like a badge of honor. He smiled. No measuring tape. No angry letters. No fear. Just a driveway. A home. A family.
And peace.
Some battles aren't fought with fists or fury, but with patience, persistence, and the quiet conviction that right is right, even when no one's watching. Jack didn't set out to lead a revolution. But sometimes, all it takes is one person refusing to back down, to remind a community what it's capable of. And sometimes, the sweetest kind of freedom is finally feeling at home. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't tearing someone down, it's building something better in their place. A community where no one has to live in fear, tiptoe around petty rules, or feel like an outsider in their own home. And never underestimate the quiet ones. The ones who nod and smile while taking notes. Because while others are flexing power, they're building a plan, one patient, strategic step at a time. And when they rise, they don't just fight back, they change everything. Because real power doesn't come from titles or clipboards. It comes from community, from courage, and from the quiet conviction that everyone deserves to belong.